Bethany laughed and told swimmers to head toward the dolphins, even after I saw the shark circle a little girl on a pink unicorn. I grabbed an air horn and cleared the water anyway. That was the day she started calling me Shark Girl, got me fired, and tried to ruin my life. 6 months later, I'm standing in her old lifeguard tower with a state badge, watching families swim safely under the reforms she accidentally created. I was walking along Huntington Beach with my bestie when I saw it, this fin about 50 yards out, moving weird. I ran to the lifeguard station. There's a shark out there. The lifeguard, this blonde woman named Bethany, barely looked up from her phone. Those are dolphins. I've been guarding this beach for 5 years. You've been here, what, 5 minutes? But the fin is moving wrong, I tried to explain. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they'd fall out. Last month I cleared this entire beach for dolphins. Dolphins. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Everyone still calls me Dolphin Bethany. I know the difference now. Please just look through the binoculars. Ma'am, stop creating panic or I'll have you removed from the beach. I watched that fin get closer. My hands were shaking. Not because I was wrong, because I knew I was right. But here's the thing. I had a panic attack at a beach 2 years ago. Thought I saw a deadly jellyfish when it was just a plastic bag. My therapist spent months working with me on it. Trust the professionals. Don't let anxiety control you. Those words kept circling in my head like sharks. But better safe than sorry, right? So I pulled out my phone to call 911. No signal, of course. I walked around frantically trying to get bars. Nothing. I asked other beachgoers. Do you see that? A few squinted and nodded but shrugged. Lifeguards know best. This local surfer paddled over to shore. Yo, that's not moving like a dolphin, he said. Thank goodness. Someone else sees it. I ran back to Bethany. Even the surfers are saying, she stood up angry. Oh, perfect. Now you're here. I was confused. What? She looked me up and down. How's Jason, by the way? My stomach dropped. Jason was this guy I'd been seeing for 2 weeks. I knew his ex was blonde, but I never found out her name. Until now. Girl, who fucking cares about him right now? There's a shark. Right, she interrupted. First you steal my boyfriend, now you want to ruin my job? Typical. She pulled out her phone and showed me this video. Some news clip titled, Lifeguard Panics Over Flipper. But you'd love that, wouldn't you? Make me look stupid again? Please just do something, I begged. Those hotel cleaners finally got their 1 day off this month. She gestured to a group of women setting up umbrellas. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Probably never worked a real job. My therapist's voice was screaming in my head. Don't be the hysteric Latina stereotype. Stay calm. Trust authority. But that fin disappeared underwater and I saw it. This dark shadow. Moving toward the kids on boogie boards. Bethany saw my face. She smirked. See? Dolphins dive. Maybe they don't teach marine biology where you're from. Then she did something that made my blood freeze. She grabbed her megaphone. Attention swimmers. Please move to the middle of the swimming area, away from the beach. We have someone harassing swimmers near shore. I watched helplessly as dozens of people swam directly into the danger zone. Parents pulling their kids further from shore. Teenagers on floaties paddling out. All of them trusting her. My whole body felt paralyzed. This was happening. This was actually happening, and she was making it worse. Making them sitting ducks. Then I saw her. This little girl, maybe 6, on a pink inflatable unicorn. She'd drifted away from the main group. The current was pulling her sideways, right toward where I'd last seen the shadow. I screamed at her, but she couldn't hear me over the waves. She just smiled and waved back. Bethany got on her radio. Yeah, now she's trying to scare children. I need beach patrol here now. The dolphin rose under the unicorn. The whole thing flipped. The little girl disappeared under the water. I spotted an air horn on the beach near the surfboards. Didn't think, just ran. Bethany saw me. Don't you dare! But I was already there. Already had the air horn in my hand. I'm not letting kids die because you're jealous. Blart! Blart! Everyone in the water turned. Shark! Get out! Shark! I screamed, pointing at the overturned unicorn. The little girl surfaced, gasping, something gray thrashing next to her. Her dad was swimming frantically toward her. The surfers saw it first, started screaming, Shark! Shark! Move! Then everyone saw it. Mass panic. People scrambling for shore. The dad reached his daughter just as the shark circled back. That's when it showed itself. 8 feet of bull shark jumping in the air. It crashed back down on her unicorn float, tore it to shreds. Beach patrol showed up fast. The whole thing was on security footage. While we waited for the police to arrive, she pointed one finger at me and screamed, this is exactly what she wanted. 2 days later, I couldn't stop myself from driving back to the beach. I parked in the lot and just sat there watching families play in the waves. Kids were jumping through the surf while their parents lounged on towels. Everyone trusted the lifeguards completely. The same lifeguards who worked with Bethany. My phone kept buzzing with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Called me crazy. Said I was looking for attention. One said they knew where I worked. My hands shook as I deleted them one by one. Around 6 that evening, Carlos showed up at my apartment with his laptop. He'd been digging through public records all day. 3 near drownings in Bethany's zone just this summer. All of them got written up as swimmer error. He showed me the pattern on his screen. Every single incident happened during her shifts. Every complaint got buried in the system. The next morning, I woke up to someone pounding on my door so hard the frame shook. Jason stood there with Bethany right behind him. She had her phone out recording. Jason's face was all twisted up with anger. He demanded I tell her the truth about targeting her because of him. Bethany kept smirking while holding that phone steady. She told me to go ahead and confess. I looked Jason straight in the eyes and told him I didn't even know she was his ex until she said it on the beach. Bethany laughed and said Jason told her I'd been cyberstalking stalking her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told Jason I didn't even know her last name and he could check my search history if he wanted. He started to look unsure, but then Bethany touched his arm and whispered something. They left, but the damage was done. I checked my social media and found dozens of posts calling me Shark Girl. Some people supported me, but most were calling me hysterical. Bethany's lifeguard friends were leading the hate campaign. Then I saw the email from HR. My boss pulled me aside when I got to work. Someone claiming to be a city official had sent multiple complaints about my unstable behavior. He showed me the emails from D. Johnson Morrison, but I noticed the email address was wrong. Someone was pretending to be the beach supervisor. At lunch, Isabella Reeves found me in the cafeteria. Her daughter was having nightmares about that day. The little girl kept saying the pretty lifeguard told everyone to swim toward the shark. Isabella showed me pictures her daughter had drawn. There in crayon was Bethany pointing at the water, while a dark shape circled underneath. I had to see my therapist that afternoon for an emergency session. She reminded me that 2 years ago I thought I saw danger that wasn't there, but this time the danger was real. She told me to trust myself, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Bethany had gotten into my head again. Later, Tom texted me to check the surf forums. Other people were starting to come forward online. I found 3 other times when Bethany dismissed real dangers. Jellyfish swarms she ignored. Riptide warnings she laughed off. Even another shark sighting from last year. Every single time someone got hurt and she blamed them for it. The next morning, Diane called me. Someone had been sending emails from a fake version of her account. Then she dropped the real bomb. Bethany had filed for a restraining order against me. Diane said I needed to get a lawyer immediately. My stomach felt like it dropped through the floor. Bethany was trying to shut me up before the truth got out. Carlos showed up at my apartment 3 days later with a stack of papers he'd printed from the county database. He spread them across my kitchen table, pointing at response logs from the fire department. Bethany's lifeguard zone had 15 emergency calls this summer, compared to 3 for every other zone on the beach. The paramedics had to respond to drownings, panic attacks, and injuries that happened when she was on duty. One report mentioned a kid who almost drowned because she told swimmers to ignore rip current warnings. Another documented a jellyfish sting victim she refused to help because she thought they were faking. Carlos had highlighted every single incident where someone got hurt in her area. The pattern was obvious. The restraining order hearing came the next afternoon at the courthouse downtown. I wore my only business suit and sat with the public defender they assigned me. Bethany walked in with 2 lawyers and Jason trailing behind her. She handed the judge printed text messages that showed Jason calling me obsessed and unstable. I'd never seen those texts before. Jason wouldn't look at me. The judge read through everything for 20 minutes while I sat there shaking. He granted the temporary order without letting me explain anything. 500 feet meant I couldn't go to the beach, the pier, or even the shops near the water. Back in my apartment that afternoon, I scrolled through my phone watching the shark video hit 2 million views. The comments were split between people calling me a hero and others saying I was a jealous ex who endangered everyone. Bethany had done 3 interviews already, telling everyone I'd been stalking Jason and used the shark as an excuse to ruin her career. I'm really curious about how Bethany's brain works. She saw an actual shark attack happen right in front of her, but still blamed the person who saved everyone. My phone rang around 7 that evening. Alexander Powell introduced himself as a lawyer who specialized in beach safety cases. He'd been tracking lifeguard negligence for 2 years, and Bethany's name kept appearing in his files. He wanted to meet, but I was too exhausted to think straight. The next morning, Isabella knocked on my door with 7 other parents behind her. They pushed into my living room, all talking at once about their kids being in that water. One father showed me his son's hospital bills from the panic injuries when everyone stampeded out of the ocean. Another mother had videos of Bethany laughing while kids screamed. They wanted to file a joint complaint with the city. 2 hours later, I was at work scanning inventory when Jason walked in with a woman in a suit. She went straight to my boss's office while Jason stood by the door like a guard. I could hear her through the thin walls saying I'd been harassing multiple beach employees. She had a folder full of complaints from lifeguards I'd never even met. My boss called me in and told me to go home until they sorted this out. I grabbed my purse and walked past Jason without saying anything. In my car, I completely lost it. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't get the key in the ignition. Carlos found me there an hour later, sobbing into the steering wheel. He held me while I cried about losing everything for trying to save people. That afternoon, I went through Tom's GoPro footage frame by frame on my laptop. In the corner of one shot, barely visible behind the crowd, Bethany was actually smiling as she pointed people toward deeper water. Not a nervous smile or a confused smile. A real smile like she was enjoying the chaos. I zoomed in and took screenshots. Alexander called while I was saving the files. Bethany's lawyers were claiming defamation and wanted $50,000 for career damages. I actually laughed because I had maybe $2,000 in savings. Alexander explained they knew I couldn't pay but wanted me to publicly admit I was wrong about everything. The next morning, Isabella sent me a text that made my stomach drop. The city was threatening her job at the hotel if she didn't withdraw her complaint. 2 other parents had already backed out after getting similar warnings. Bethany's reach went way beyond the beach. Tom called me the next morning and told me to come to his surf shop on Main Street since it was one of the few places I could legally go without violating the restraining order. I drove there in my beat-up Honda and found him waiting outside with his arms crossed. He led me to the back office and pulled out his phone to show me old text messages from his nephew who used to work at the beach. The messages were from 2 years ago and they showed Bethany threatening his nephew after he reported her for drinking vodka from a water bottle during her shift. She got him fired 3 days later by claiming he touched her inappropriately. Tom scrolled through screenshot after screenshot showing the same pattern with other beach employees who crossed her. I was taking photos of everything when Diane walked through the door without knocking. She looked around nervously and locked the door behind her before pulling a thick folder from her bag. She spread out papers on Tom's desk, showing complaint after complaint against against Bethany that had been buried or dismissed. Each one had the same note at the bottom about insufficient evidence or withdrawn testimony. Diane pointed to a name that kept appearing on the dismissal forms, and my stomach sank when I saw it was Bethany's father, who was the city councilman. She explained she'd been tracking this for months, but couldn't do anything official because the city controlled her job, and she had 3 kids to feed. I spent the rest of the afternoon at my apartment just staring at the ocean from my balcony, knowing I couldn't set foot on the sand without getting arrested. My phone kept buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and when I checked LinkedIn, 3 recruiters had suddenly withdrawn their interest in my resume. The apartment felt smaller with each passing hour, and I could see the beach from my window mocking me with its closeness. Carlos showed up around 7 with Chinese takeout and more bad news about 3 paramedics who wanted to testify about Bethany's negligence, but were too scared because the city controlled their contracts. He showed me their written statements on his phone describing other incidents where Bethany ignored safety warnings and put people at risk. The paramedics said they needed someone with nothing left to lose to speak up first before they'd risk their jobs. I barely slept that night and woke up to my car alarm going off at 8 in the morning. Someone had slashed all 4 tires and spray painted LIAR across my windshield in red paint. The security camera footage from my building showed someone in a black hoodie, but the face was completely hidden. The cop who came to take the report looked at me funny when he saw my name on his clipboard and asked if I was the one who caused all that trouble at the beach. I spent $200 I didn't have on new tires and tried to focus on something positive. Alexander called while I was at the tire shop and suggested we file Freedom of Information Act requests for all beach incident reports from the past 3 years. We met at his office and spent hours filling out forms requesting every document related to beach safety and lifeguard conduct. Alexander kept saying the numbers wouldn't lie if there was a pattern of negligence. I was staying at Carlos's apartment by then because I didn't feel safe at my own place. Jason showed up at the door around 1 looking scared and sweaty. He kept checking over his shoulder while telling me Bethany was losing it and talking about ruining my whole family. I grabbed my phone and started recording while he talked about how she'd been acting crazy since the beach incident. He said he didn't know she was capable of this level of revenge when they dated. I asked him to testify, but he shook his head and pulled out his phone instead. He showed me photos he'd taken of pages from Bethany's notebook where she kept track of everyone who'd wronged her. My name was there with detailed plans about destroying my reputation and getting me blacklisted from every job in the area. The notebook went back years with names crossed out after she'd gotten her revenge on them. Other pages showed she'd been planning to get me since she first saw Jason and me together at that coffee shop 3 months ago. Jason left the photos with me but refused to testify publicly because he was scared of what she'd do to him. I spent the rest of that afternoon organizing everything we'd collected into a binder. Tom's footage from the beach was on a flash drive along with witness statements from parents and the hotel workers. Diane's buried reports showed a clear pattern going back years of Bethany using her position to hurt people. Jason's photos of the notebook proved this was calculated and deliberate harassment. The evidence was overwhelming, but I still needed something official to make authorities take notice. The next morning, I got an email saying our FOIA request had been immediately denied due to a pending investigation. Diane texted me 10 minutes later with a screenshot of an emergency city council meeting agenda. Her father had added an item about addressing beach terrorism and protecting city employees from harassment. The description made it clear they meant me, even though they didn't use my name. The city was actively protecting her now and using their power to bury everything we'd found. Isabella texted me that same morning saying she was done being scared and called 30 parents to meet at the community center. I drove there and found the parking lot packed with minivans and SUVs. Inside the main room, parents were already sharing what their kids went through that day at the beach. One mom held up her daughter's ripped swimsuit from when everyone panicked. Another dad showed video of his son having nightmares about sharks. A local reporter walked in with her camera guy and started recording everything. The parents kept talking about how their kids were scared to go back in the water. Isabella stood up and told everyone we needed to stick together because they couldn't bully all of us at once. The reporter interviewed 3 different families, and each one said the same thing about how Bethany put their kids in danger. After the meeting, the reporter pulled me aside and showed me something on her laptop. She'd found records showing Bethany had worked at 5 different beaches in 3 years, which was weird for someone who was supposed to be so good at her job. Each time she left, it was right after complaints got filed, but those complaints always disappeared. She asked if I'd go on record, and I said yes because I was tired of hiding. We sat in her news van for 2 hours while I went through everything that happened. I showed her the timestamps from the security footage and the witness statements we'd collected. She had copies of old complaints from other beaches that matched what happened with me. Her phone buzzed and she showed me the screen. Jason had forwarded texts from Bethany saying she was going to make me pay for ruining her life. The texts got worse, with each one calling me names and saying she had connections who would destroy me. That night I couldn't sleep even though we'd finally gotten someone to listen. I kept checking my locks and pulling my curtains tighter. Every car that drove by made me jump. I knew her dad had money and lawyers and friends in high places. My hands shook when I tried to eat dinner. The next morning, Alexander called and said he was filing our civil suit against the city for not supervising Bethany properly. He emailed me the paperwork which named her specifically and demanded they keep all their records. How does someone keep getting away with this for so long? The way Bethany tracked every person who upset her in a notebook, that takes such careful planning. 2 hours later, I got served with papers at my apartment. Bethany's lawyer was suing me for defamation and wanted $200,000. My stomach dropped when I saw the amount. Tom called me crying that afternoon because someone had smashed every window in his surf shop overnight. The walls had SNITCH painted in red across the front. The security cameras were spray painted black, so there was no footage of who did it. He told me he wasn't backing down though because he'd been running that shop out for 30 years. His insurance company called while we were talking and said they wouldn't cover the damage because it was considered riot-related. Later that day, I got a call from an unknown number. The guy said his name was Derek, and he worked as a lifeguard with Bethany. He sounded scared, but said he had recordings of her bragging about teaching me a lesson at the beach. He had 2 little kids and knew what it was like being bullied by her. He sent me the audio files through an encrypted app. You could hear Bethany laughing about how she was going to make me look crazy. She even said she knew it was a shark, but wanted to see me freak out. Her dad held a press conference that afternoon with the mayor standing right next to him. They talked about mob mentality and vigilante justice against public servants. He announced they were investigating coordinated harassment of his daughter. The mayor nodded along and said the city supported their lifeguards completely. They made it sound like I was leading some kind of witch hunt. Carlos showed up at my apartment that night with a sleeping bag and takeout. He was worried about my safety after seeing the press conference. We ate Chinese food and tried not to watch the news, but it was on every channel. He made a joke about how our biggest worry used to be picking which beach to go to on weekends. We both laughed, but it felt empty. Everything from before the shark felt like it happened to someone else. The next morning, the city made an announcement that made me want to throw up. They promoted Bethany to head of beach safety training, which meant she'd be teaching every new lifeguard. Isabella texted me right away saying this was their way of showing us what happens when we speak up. Alexander called me 3 days later while I was sitting in Carlos's kitchen staring at job listings on my laptop. He'd been digging through court records at the county clerk's office all morning and found something weird in the database. 2 sealed cases against Bethany Walsh in different counties, both from before she moved to Huntington Beach. The clerk he knew from law school pulled him aside and whispered that both cases involved workplace harassment claims that got settled out of court. Alexander said this wasn't her first time using the system to destroy someone, and he was going to keep digging. I'd barely hung up when my phone rang again, and my boss's name flashed on the screen. He sounded tired and kept clearing his throat before telling me the city was threatening to pull all their maintenance contracts if I wasn't terminated immediately. He had 40 employees who needed their jobs and couldn't risk losing the contracts. I was fired effective immediately, but he'd give me 2-week severance if I signed an NDA about the whole situation. I drove to the unemployment office that afternoon and sat in a plastic chair filling out forms while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The clerk processing my paperwork looked up from my ID and her eyes went wide. She leaned forward and whispered that her daughter was one of the kids on boogie boards that day and thanked me for what I did. Small moments like that helped, but they didn't change the fact that my savings would run out in 2 months. The next morning, Derek called me sobbing because they'd transferred him to a beach 40 miles north with no bus route. With 3 kids and no car, he couldn't make that commute, and they knew it. He said he was sorry, but he had to withdraw his witness statement because he couldn't lose his health insurance. That's when I realized they were picking us off one by one. Isabella wasn't giving up, though, and organized a protest at the beach for noon. 50 parents showed up with their kids holding signs that said things like, "Safety over politics," and "Our kids matter more than your ego." Bethany had to be escorted to her lifeguard tower by 3 security guards while parents shouted at her. She pulled out her phone and started live streaming herself as the victim of mob harassment, crying about how she was just trying to do her job. The news crews that showed up focused their cameras on her instead of the parents, and by evening the story was about poor Bethany being bullied, not about the shark incident. Alexander texted me that afternoon saying one of the women from the sealed cases had seen the news coverage and recognized Bethany. She was scared but sent him documents showing how Bethany had systematically destroyed her life after finding out she'd gone on one date with Bethany's ex-boyfriend. Bank accounts frozen through false fraud claims, anonymous tips to her employer about drug use, photos doctored to look compromising sent to her husband. She said I was at least the 3rd person Bethany had done this to. That evening, Jason showed up at Carlos's apartment completely drunk and shaking. He collapsed on the couch and showed us text messages from Bethany threatening to file assault charges if he didn't publicly support her version of events. She'd taken photos of him passed out at her place months ago and edited them to look like evidence of an attack. She had a whole timeline written out with fake witnesses ready to back her up. He kept saying he was sorry over and over while Carlos made him coffee and tried to calm him down. The next morning, Alexander tried to subpoena the beach security footage, but the city claimed it had been routinely deleted, despite their policy requiring 90-day retention. Tom knew a guy who worked in IT for the city who said deleted files could still be recovered from the servers, but it would take someone with admin access to get them. My therapist had moved our appointment to 11 that morning, and I sat in her office feeling different than I had 2 years ago. She pointed out that I wasn't having panic attacks despite everything happening, and that I'd learned to channel my anxiety into action instead of letting it paralyze me. She was right, but it felt weird to realize Bethany's harassment had actually made me stronger somehow. I was walking back to my car when my phone rang, and Diane's name appeared. She was crying and furious at the same time. They'd just fired her for performance issues after 5 years of perfect reviews. She said she was done being scared and had been making copies of everything for months. 3 years of complaints about Bethany that got buried, witnesses who got transferred or fired, a pattern that went back to when Bethany first started. Diane had names, dates, documents, and she was ready to go public with all of it. Alexander called us all to his office early the next morning. Isabella arrived first with Tom right behind her. Diane brought 3 thick folders stuffed with papers. Carlos showed up with 2 other parents who'd witnessed different incidents over the years. Alexander spread everything across his conference table. The stack of complaints went back 3 years. Witness statements filled page after page, photos of injuries from swimmers who got hurt while Bethany was on duty. Alexander pointed to the state beach board contact information. Everyone nodded and signed the forms he'd prepared. We spent 3 hours organizing everything into categories. Videos on one flash drive, written testimony testimonies in another folder. Pattern documentation showing how complaints always disappeared. Sealed case references that Alexander had found through legal channels. 47 pages of evidence by the time we finished. Alexander made copies for everyone. We were about to drive to the state office when the door opened. This man in an expensive suit walked in holding papers. He handed them to Alexander without saying anything. Alexander read them and his face went white. An emergency injunction blocking any state filing. A judge had signed it an hour ago. The order said we couldn't file anything until the local investigation was complete. Diane looked at all of us. Someone had told them our plan. The room went quiet. Isabella stared at Tom like she didn't trust him anymore. Tom kept asking Diane if her firing was real or staged. I started wondering if Jason's breakdown at the restaurant was just an act. Nobody wanted to say it, but we all felt it. Someone in this room had betrayed us. We left Marcus's office separately. Nobody talked to each other. That night I couldn't sleep. Carlos called me at dawn. He'd been checking things all night. One of the parents had gotten a promotion offer at the Marriott where the city has contracts. Carlos found the email trail. The parent had forwarded our entire plan to Bethany's father. At least we knew who the leak was now. Alexander suggested we use it to our advantage. We'd send different information to different people. See what got back to Bethany. Tom called with news that afternoon. His tech friend had been working on something. The beach cameras from that day had been wiped, but not completely. He'd recovered partial footage from a backup server. The video showed everything. Bethany looking right at the shark, her face showing she knew exactly what it was, then her deliberately pointing swimmers toward it. The tech guy kept rewinding it. Alexander watched it 5 times. He picked up his phone and called the state attorney general's office directly. Criminal charges for reckless endangerment of minors. Criminal negligence. The footage made it impossible to ignore. State investigators would arrive within 2 days. That evening, Carlos was making dinner when someone knocked. He opened the door and Bethany was standing there with 2 huge guys. Oh wow, the tech guy finding that deleted footage changes everything. I wonder how Bethany's face looked when she saw the shark and still pointed people toward it. That recovery from the backup server is like finding a hidden treasure that shows the whole truth. She pushed past him into his apartment. I was in the bedroom and turned on my phone's recorder. She told Carlos to drop the charges. Said his brother worked construction on city contracts. Said accidents happen on job sites all the time. Carlos stood there frozen. She gave him 24 hours to decide. After she left, Carlos sat on his couch for an hour without moving. Then he looked at me. He grabbed my phone and posted the recording on Twitter before I could stop him. Within an hour, it had 1,000 shares. By morning, it was everywhere. The hashtag Bethany Threatens was trending. News vans started showing up at the beach. Her father tried to hold a press conference, but reporters weren't buying it anymore. They kept asking about the threats. He walked off without answering. The whole city was watching now. That morning, my phone started blowing up around 10. 3 lifeguards from the beach had gone to the news station together. I watched them on the live feed standing there with this reporter. The first one pulled out his phone and showed photos to the camera. You could see Bethany passed out in the lifeguard tower while on duty. The timestamp showed noon on a busy Saturday. The second lifeguard had screenshots of texts where she threatened to get him fired if he reported her drinking. The third one talked about how she made him cover for her when she'd leave early to party. The reporter asked them why they were coming forward now. They said Carlos posting that recording gave them courage. Within an hour, the state sent investigators to the beach. They showed up with boxes and started taking files from the main office. The city manager tried to stop them, but they had warrants. I watched from across the street as they carried out computer hard drives and filing cabinets. One investigator saw me standing there and walked over. He told me they'd seen this pattern before in small beach towns. Connected families protecting their kids while people got hurt. By 3 that afternoon, Bethany's father called a press conference at City Hall. He stood at the podium and announced his daughter was taking a voluntary leave for stress-related health issues. The reporters weren't buying it though. They kept asking about the threats and the drinking photos. Then this woman in the back stood up. She said Bethany had gotten her sister fired from the beach 5 years ago for refusing to date her friend. Another person raised their hand and said Bethany had planted drugs in his locker when he complained about her. More hands went up. People were recording everything on their phones. Jason texted me around 6 that evening. He wanted to meet at this coffee shop downtown. When I got there, he had a whole folder of printed texts and emails. His hands were shaking as he showed them to me. The messages went back months. Bethany had been planning to hurt me since she found out we were dating. She actually wrote that she didn't care if people drowned as long as I looked bad. She'd told him if he didn't help destroy me, she'd ruin his career. He'd recorded some of their phone calls too. You could hear her laughing about how she'd make sure kids were in danger when the shark showed up. The next morning, the news reported that the state had suspended Bethany's lifeguard certification. Her father went on TV threatening to sue the state. But then the governor's office released a statement saying public safety wasn't negotiable. Federal beach inspectors announced they were coming to review all of Huntington Beach's procedures. Around noon, I walked past the beach even though I was still banned. Families were playing in the waves like nothing had happened. Kids were building sandcastles where that little girl almost died. My savings account was empty from legal fees. I'd lost my job when this whole thing started. Jason and I were done. Standing there watching everyone have fun while my life was destroyed felt so wrong. Isabella found me sitting on a bench staring at the water. She sat down and said I did the right thing, but doing the right thing had cost me everything. That afternoon around 3, the police showed up at Bethany's house. The news cameras were already there when they walked her out in handcuffs. She was being charged with reckless endangerment and witness intimidation and filing false police reports. Her father's connections couldn't help with state charges. They released her on bail but took her passport. The local news kept showing her mugshot next to the beach where everything happened. The next morning, the city council called an emergency session. 3 council members who'd always supported Bethany's father suddenly started talking about transparency and accountability. They voted to cooperate fully with the the state investigation. Her father sat there watching his political friends abandon him. He'd spent all his influence trying to protect his daughter, and now he had nothing left. Diane called me around noon with news that made me cry. The city had offered her job back with back pay and a promotion. She was going to be the new head of beach safety. She wanted me to come work as a consultant to help reform their policies. It was a paid position that would help me get back on my feet. She said no more buried complaints and no more connected kids getting special treatment. Alexander called that afternoon to tell me he'd filed civil suits for 7 families whose kids were in the water during the shark incident. The city was already asking for settlement talks. He said they wanted this to go away quietly, but he was pushing for real changes to how the beach was run. The negotiations were just starting, but he thought we had a strong case. 3 days passed before my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I opened it and my stomach dropped. It was from Bethany. The message said I destroyed her life over nothing and she was just protecting Jason from me. I screenshot it immediately and forwarded it to Marcus. He called within 2 minutes and told me this was a clear bail violation. He'd add it to the charges and notify the prosecutor. I hung up and drove to Tom's surf shop that afternoon. The place was packed with parents and surfers and even some off-duty lifeguards all talking about beach safety reforms. Tom had set up whiteboards with new protocol ideas and everyone was adding suggestions. He pulled me aside and said this wasn't about revenge, but about making sure no one else got a Bethany. People were sharing their own stories about close calls and ignored warnings. I stayed for an hour watching them organize before my phone rang. It was Jason asking if we could meet. I almost said no, but something in his voice made me agree. We met at a coffee shop near the pier and he looked terrible. He explained how Bethany had threatened him and made him believe I was dangerous through months of manipulation. He showed me old texts where she'd threatened to hurt herself if he left her. I didn't forgive him, but I understood we were both her victims. The difference was, I chose to fight while he chose to comply. The next morning, Alexander called with huge news. A federal investigation had found Huntington Beach had the highest rate of preventable beach injuries in California. Bethany's zone specifically had 300% more incidents than average. The pattern went back years with complaints buried and reports altered. The city's insurance company was threatening to triple premiums unless massive reforms happened immediately. By noon that same day, the news got even bigger. Bethany's father announced his resignation from city council to focus on family matters. His resignation letter blamed a witch hunt mentality, but Alexander had heard from sources that other council members demanded he step down. The whole system that protected Bethany was falling apart. That afternoon, Bethany posted a video online claiming I'd orchestrated everything because Jason chose her over me. Within an hour, Jason posted their entire text history showing months of her threats and manipulation. Screenshots of her saying she'd ruin his life if he left her and worse. Her remaining supporters finally saw the truth, and she deleted all her social media accounts. The next morning, I got a call from the court. The restraining order against me was being vacated, and the judge wanted to apologize for being misled. I drove straight to the beach and stood at the water's edge for the first time in weeks. A woman approached me and grabbed my hand. She said I was the woman who saved her daughter. More people gathered around thanking me and sharing their own stories. It felt surreal standing there where it all happened. Alexander called that afternoon with news about Bethany. State prosecutors had offered her a plea deal to plead guilty to reckless endangerment and serve 18 months with a lifetime ban from lifeguarding. Her lawyer was advising her to take it since the alternative was a trial with potential 5-year sentence. She had 48 hours to decide. Later that day, the city announced a comprehensive settlement including a $2 million fund for victims and complete beach restructuring with civilian oversight. Isabella got nominated to serve on the board and called me crying happy tears. She kept saying from hotel cleaner to safety advocate over and over. Real change was happening. The next morning, Alexander called with unbelievable news. Bethany had rejected the plea deal and was insisting on trial. She told prosecutors she did nothing wrong and was a hero being persecuted. Her lawyer withdrew from the case immediately. Her father hired an expensive defense team, but even they seemed shocked by her stance. She genuinely believed she was the victim in all this. The trial was set for 6 months out. 3 weeks passed before Diane called me with news that changed everything. She'd created a new position at the beach, director of beach advocacy, and wanted me to take it. The way Bethany's brain works is like a puzzle. She really believes she's the victim even after threatening people and putting kids in danger. My first day back wasn't at my old data entry job, but in a real office overlooking the water. I spent that morning setting up an anonymous complaint system where anyone could report lifeguard problems without fear. The online form went live at noon, and within an hour we had 17 reports from different California beaches. That evening, Carlos took me to our favorite Mexican place and watched me push food around my plate. "You know you're different now," he said quietly. I nodded because he was right. The old me would have trusted Bethany, would have backed down, would have let those kids die. The next morning, Tom organized this workshop right on the beach for kids and parents. He showed them videos of the incident, taught them warning signs of bad lifeguards, told them to keep speaking up if something felt wrong. 40 families showed up, and by the end, parents were exchanging numbers, creating a safety network. My phone buzzed constantly with news alerts as 2 San Diego beaches announced investigations into their lifeguards after our case went viral. A mother from Del Mar called crying, said her son reported a drunk lifeguard last week, and they actually listened because of what happened here. Isabella planned this gathering at the exact spot where everything happened, right where I'd grabbed that air horn. Survivors, witnesses, supporters all came together not to celebrate Bethany's downfall, but to reclaim our beach. Kids played in the waves while new lifeguards, properly trained ones, watched carefully from their towers. I started packing up my apartment the next day since the new job came with better pay, and I could afford something closer to the beach. Found my old therapy journal in a box. The last entry from 2 years ago video reading, "Trust the professionals, they know best." I grabbed a pen and wrote underneath it, "Trust yourself first, you know when something's wrong." Alexander called me in for our final meeting about the civil case and spread out papers showing the real impact. 47 beaches had updated their protocols, 12 lifeguards had been removed for negligence, 3 new state laws were being drafted. "You saved hundreds of future victims," he said, pointing at the statistics. That afternoon, news broke that Bethany's trial was being postponed because her new lawyers claimed she needed psychiatric evaluation. Reports said she'd been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, and her father had mortgaged their house to pay legal fees. Everything they'd built through connections and intimidation had crumbled completely. 6 months after that day on the beach, the verdict finally came through. Bethany got 3 years with possible parole in 18 months, still maintaining she did nothing wrong even as the judge read the guilty verdict on all counts. Her father moved to Arizona, Jason was seeing a therapist and rebuilding his life, and the beach hadn't had a single incident under the new safety protocols. Now I stand on the same lifeguard tower where Bethany once sat, doing my inspection rounds as part of my job. The beach is packed with families enjoying the water safely, proper lifeguards scanning constantly, parents relaxed knowing their kids are protected. A little girl floats by on a pink unicorn, the same kind from that terrible day, and she waves at me with a huge smile. I wave back, no longer afraid of the ocean that once triggered my panic attacks, because now I'm the one making sure everyone stays safe. Sometimes the worst experiences create the strongest advocates, and Bethany accidentally turned me into exactly what this beach needed. What a ride, so many questions answered, and even more to keep us curious. I've loved exploring every twist and turn with you. Like the video, it helps more than you think.